I was still bleeding when my husband walked into my hospital room, looked me in the eyes, and told me our marriage was over. Not with tears. Not with guilt. With a suit, a smile, and a woman wearing his ring on her finger. I had just come out of a 7-hour surgery. I had just given up a piece of my own body, willingly, without hesitation, to save his mother's life. The anesthesia hadn't even fully worn off. My left side felt like someone had reached inside me and pulled out something I could never get back. Because they had. And Conrad Bennett stood at the foot of my bed, dropped a thick envelope directly onto my surgical wound, and said, "Sign it. We're done." His mother laughed. His mistress flashed a diamond the size of my dignity. And I lay there, too weak to sit up, too broken to speak, realizing that the last 3 years of my life had not been a marriage. They had been a transaction. I was Brecken Hale. I was 31 years old. I was a donor, a wife, a fool. And I had absolutely no idea that the surgeon standing just outside that door was about to walk in and destroy every single one of them. I need you to understand who I was before Conrad, because the woman I was then makes everything that came after feel even more devastating. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked and brought casseroles when your father passed. My dad died when I was 19 and my mother followed 2 years later, not from illness, but from grief, I think. She simply stopped wanting to be here without him. I inherited their house, their small savings, and a loneliness so complete it had weight to it. I moved to Chicago at 22 with 2 suitcases and a biology degree I wasn't sure what to do with. I found work as a medical records coordinator at a mid-size hospital, and I was good at it, detail-oriented, reliable, the kind of person supervisors trusted with sensitive files, because I never made it about myself. I had a small apartment, a handful of friends, and a quiet life I was slowly, carefully building into something that felt like home. I met Conrad at a hospital fundraising gala 3 years ago. He was there representing his family's pharmaceutical company, all polished charm and easy confidence, the kind of man who made every room feel like it had been arranged specifically for him. He found me by the windows, away from the crowd, and asked if I was hiding too. I should have said yes and walked away. Instead, I laughed. That laugh cost me everything. Conrad Bennett was attentive in a way I had never experienced. He called when he said he would. He remembered small details, the name of my college roommate, the brand of tea I preferred, the anniversary of my mother's passing. He made me feel seen in a way that, looking back, I understand was deliberate. He was studying me, cataloging what I needed to hear, constructing a version of himself specifically designed to make me fall. I fell completely. We were married 11 months after we met, in a small ceremony that his mother, Georgiana, attended with visible reluctance. I noticed it then, the way she looked at me like I was something temporary, but Conrad explained it away as her natural reserve. She was a proud woman, he said. She took time to warm up. Give her space. So I gave her space. I gave her years of trying. Dinners I cooked that she sent back to the kitchen, invitations to family events that arrived too late for me to attend, comments about my background delivered with a smile so thin it barely qualified as one. Georgiana Bennett had decided I was beneath her son before I ever opened my mouth, and nothing I did changed that assessment. Conrad always took her side. Gently, diplomatically, but always hers. I told myself that was just how families worked. I told myself I was lucky to have someone who loved his mother that fiercely. I told myself a lot of things. 18 months into the marriage, Georgiana's kidneys began to fail. It happened faster than the doctors expected, stage 3 to stage 5 in under a year. She was placed on the transplant waiting list, but her blood type was rare, and the list was long, and Conrad came to me one night with red eyes and a question he framed as carefully as a trap disguised as a gift. The doctors want to test the immediate family for compatibility, he said. You're my wife. Your family. Would you consider being tested? I said yes, without hesitation. Because that's what you do for family. The test came back. I was a match. Conrad held me for a long time that night, and he cried, real tears, I was certain of it, and he told me I was the most extraordinary person he had ever known. He told me he would spend the rest of his life being grateful. He told me our future together was going to be everything we'd ever talked about. 3 months later, I signed the consent forms and checked myself into the hospital. I never once doubted it was the right thing to do. I woke up in the wrong room. Conrad had promised me the private recovery suite on the 4th floor, the one with the wide windows and the dedicated nursing staff. What I woke up in was a converted storage room at the end of the hall, the kind of space that still smelled faintly of cleaning supplies despite the attempt to make it look clinical. Water stains mapped the ceiling tiles. The call button had a cracked casing. The single window looked out onto a concrete wall. My left side felt hollowed out. Breathing was an act of effort. I reached for the cup of water on the tray beside me, and my arm shook so badly I knocked it over, and I lay there watching the water spread across the floor, too weak to do anything about it. I told myself Conrad was probably just delayed. Probably with his mother, making sure her surgery had gone smoothly. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation for the room, for the silence, for the fact that not a single person had come to check on me since I'd opened my eyes. Then the door opened. Conrad walked in first. Suit pressed, shoes polished, every hair in place. Behind him came Georgiana in a wheelchair, wrapped in a cashmere throw, looking stronger than I'd expected for someone who had just received a transplant, or perhaps that was simply her nature, to recover quickly from things she hadn't sacrificed anything for. And beside Conrad, close enough that their arms almost touched, stood Sable Voss. I knew Sable. She worked in Conrad's company in some vague executive capacity that he had always been deliberately unclear about. She was the kind of beautiful that required maintenance and intention, not natural, but constructed, expensive. I had met her at company events and noticed the way she looked at Conrad, and I had told myself it was professional admiration. I had told myself a lot of things. She was wearing a red dress and a diamond ring I had never seen before. Conrad. My voice came out barely above a whisper, cracked at the edges. Did the surgery go well? Is your mother? He walked to the bed and dropped something onto my chest. The impact hit directly on my left side, on the wound, and the pain that shot through me was sharp enough to make my vision go white for a second. I gasped, and my hands moved instinctively to the spot, and I looked down and saw a thick envelope. Divorce papers, he said. His voice was completely calm. I've already signed. You just need to add yours. I stared at the envelope. Then I looked up at him. I don't. I stopped. Started again. Conrad, I just came out of surgery. I just gave your mother my... We're aware, Georgiana said, from her wheelchair near the door. Her voice was dry and precise, shaped by decades of getting exactly what she wanted. And it was appreciated. In the functional sense. I don't understand, I whispered. I don't understand what's happening. You are useful, Conrad said, as simply as if he were explaining the terms of a business contract. My mother needed a kidney. You were compatible. That's why I married you, Brecken. I need you to understand that clearly, so there's no confusion going forward. The room was very quiet except for the cracked clock above the door. I looked at him. I waited for something in his face to shift, some flicker of the man I had believed in, some sign that this was a test or a breakdown or anything other than what it appeared to be. There was nothing. His expression was the same one he used in business negotiations. Patient, detached, final. You married me, I said slowly, to harvest my kidney. I married you because you are the only compatible match we could find who is also in a position to be persuaded, he said. Single, isolated, no close family. Emotionally available. You responded exactly as we hoped. Georgiana made a small, satisfied sound. Sable extended her left hand slightly, letting the diamond catch the fluorescent light. We've been together for 2 years, she said, her voice carrying the warm confidence of someone who had already won. The engagement was always the plan, once the situation with Georgiana was resolved. I looked at Sable's ring. I looked at Georgiana's composed expression. I looked at Conrad's empty face. And I felt something shift inside me, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet, irrevocable certainty of a door closing on a room I would never enter again. He reached into his jacket and set a check on the metal tray. $50,000. Enough to relocate and start over. The divorce agreement is straightforward. You waive any claim to shared assets in exchange for the settlement. Sign it today, and the funds transfer within 48 hours. And if I don't sign? I asked. His expression didn't change. Then we make the process longer and considerably less comfortable for you. Your choice. Georgiana smiled. Sable examined her ring. Conrad walked to the door, paused, and looked back at me one final time with the expression of someone who has already moved on. Thank you for your contribution, he said. I mean that genuinely. Then they left, and I was alone in the wrong room with a shattered chest and a check I hadn't asked for and the slow, devastating understanding that I had been hunted, carefully and patiently, by people who had never seen me as anything other than spare parts. I didn't cry right away. I think I was in too much shock to cry. I lay in that converted room and stared at the stained ceiling and breathed through the pain in my side and tried to assemble what I knew into something that made sense. 3 years. A wedding. Dinners I had cooked trying to win over a woman who had already decided I was disposable. A marriage that had been, from its first moment, a strategy. I had not been loved. I had been selected. The door opened again, and I braced for more. Another envelope, another cold declaration. Instead, a man in surgical scrubs stepped inside and closed the door quietly behind him. He was perhaps 55, with silver at his temples and the kind of unhurried calm that belongs to people who have delivered difficult news enough times to know that rushing never helps. Ms. Hale, he said. I'm Dr. Whitmore. I performed your procedure this morning. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He pulled the chair from the corner of the room and sat down, which told me immediately that whatever he had to say was not something he planned to deliver standing up. He looked at me directly, with the specific kind of careful attention that doctors reserve for moments that matter. I need to inform you of something, he said, and I want to do it now before the Bennett family leaves the building. I felt something cold move through me. What is it? Dr. Whitmore folded his hands. During the preoperative cross-matching this morning, our laboratory ran the standard final compatibility verification. It's protocol, a last check before we proceed. He paused. The results flagged an anomaly. We ran them 3 times to confirm. What kind of anomaly? The kidney was transplanted successfully, he said, but not into Georgiana Bennett. The room seemed to hold its breath. I don't understand, I said. The recipient of your kidney, Dr. Whitmore said, is a 14-year-old girl named Cassidy Roan. She has been on the transplant list for 3 years. She was in critical condition. She received your kidney at 7:42 this morning and, as of an hour ago, her body is accepting it without complication. I stared at him. Then where is Georgiana Bennett's? Georgiana Bennett was not transplanted this morning, he said. She was brought in as the scheduled recipient, but when our verification flagged the compatibility issue with her blood work, a discrepancy that suggests the compatibility tests submitted to this hospital were falsified, the surgical team made the determination to redirect the organ to the next verified match on the National Registry, which was Cassidy. The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Falsified. They falsified the compatibility reports, I said. That's what the evidence currently indicates. I've already contacted our hospital compliance office and the National Organ Oversight Board. This is not something I can keep internal. He looked at me steadily. I also need to tell you that under federal law, organ donation fraud, including falsifying medical documents to manipulate a donor, is a criminal matter. The individuals involved face serious legal consequences. I lay there with a check for $50,000 on my tray and divorce papers on my chest and the slow, spreading understanding that not only had Conrad built a marriage around deceiving me, he had forged medical documents, manipulated a hospital's transplant process, and potentially defrauded a national medical registry to do it. And he had done it poorly enough that a 14-year-old girl had accidentally received the organ instead. Cassidy, I said softly, is she going to be okay? Dr. Whitmore's expression shifted into something warm and unguarded. She's going to be fine, he said. Better than fine. You saved her life this morning, Ms. Hale. Whatever else is happening in this situation, that part is real. Something cracked open in my chest that had nothing to do with the surgical wound. Where are the Bennetts now? I asked. Still in the building. Georgiana is being held for additional evaluation given the complications with her records. Conrad and his companion are in the family waiting area on the second floor. I looked at the divorce papers. At the check. At the cracked clock above the door. I need to make a phone call, I said. Her name was Adrienne Marsh, and she had been my college roommate, my closest friend, and for the last 4 years, one of the most effective civil litigation attorneys in the state of Illinois. I had not called her nearly enough since marrying Conrad. He had never been openly hostile toward my friendships, just quietly discouraging, always finding reasons why my time was better spent elsewhere. But she picked up on the second ring, and when I told her where I was and what had happened, she said one sentence before she hung up. Do not sign anything. I'm on my way. Adrienne arrived in 40 minutes, still in her courtroom blazer, with the specific energy of someone who had been waiting a long time for something and was now ready to act. She took one look at me in that converted room with the divorce papers on the bed and the check on the tray, and her expression went very still. Tell me everything, she said. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, taking notes on her phone with a speed that told me she was already building something. When I finished, she sat quietly for a moment, then said, Let me make sure I understand. He courted you specifically because you were a compatible organ donor. He forged compatibility documentation to manipulate the hospital's transplant system. He married you under false pretenses with no intention of maintaining the marriage once the donation occurred. And he attempted to coerce you into signing a waiver of marital assets while you were in a post-operative state. Yes, I said. Adrienne looked at the check. The $50,000 was a settlement offer. He called it compensation.
He called it a lid, she said.
He wanted this sealed before you had time to think. She put her phone in her pocket and stood up. The fraud piece is already in motion. Dr. Whitmore has contacted the Oversight Board, and that's federal territory now, which means Conrad doesn't control that narrative anymore. What I'm going to focus on is the civil side. She looked at me carefully. Brecken, the Bennett family pharmaceutical company, is worth approximately $400 million. Conrad is listed as co-owner with his mother. The marriage, despite being entered under false pretenses, was legally valid for 3 years, and you maintain the role of spouse throughout. You have grounds. I don't want his money, I said. It was true. I was surprised by how true it was. Adrienne studied me. Then what do you want? I thought about Cassidy Roan, 14 years old, who had been waiting 3 years for a kidney she hadn't known was coming. I thought about Conrad's voice, that calm, boardroom voice, telling me I had responded exactly as they hoped. I thought about Georgiana's brittle laugh. Sable's raised hand, the diamond catching fluorescent light. I want them to answer for it, I said. Publicly. All of it. Adrienne smiled, and it was not a warm smile. It was the smile of someone who is very good at what they do. Then let's go make sure they don't leave this building first, she said. Conrad was standing in the second floor waiting area when Adrienne and I came around the corner, me in a hospital gown with Enforce still in my arm, moving slowly, Adrienne 2 steps ahead like a storm front. He looked up and saw us, and for the first time since I'd known him, his composure shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. Sable was beside him. Georgiana's wheelchair was near the window. Brecken, Conrad said, his voice careful. You should be resting. Probably, I agreed. Adrienne stepped forward and introduced herself in the brisk, precise tone lawyers use when they want the other side to understand exactly what is happening. She handed Conrad a document, something she had drafted on her phone in 40 minutes, which told me she had been preparing for something like this for longer than I realized. This is a notice of intent to file for fraud-based annulment, civil damages, and marital asset division in Cook County Superior Court, she said. You will also note the federal matter. The Organ Oversight Board has been contacted, and an investigation into the falsification of donor compatibility records is already underway. We have Dr. Whitmore's full cooperation. Conrad's jaw tightened. Sable's hand, the one with the ring, dropped to her side. This is premature, Conrad said, his voice stripped of its warmth now, just the mechanism underneath. The settlement offer was more than generous. Your client made a settlement offer to a woman in post-operative recovery before she had access to counsel, Adrian said. That alone will be interesting to explain in court.
She paused.
We're not interested in settling. We're interested in full disclosure. Georgiana spoke from her wheelchair, her voice sharp and clipped. You have no standing here. You signed consent forms. The donation was voluntary. Consent obtained through fraud is not valid consent, Adrian said simply. And a marriage entered under false pretenses, specifically for the purpose of accessing an unwitting donor, is going to be very difficult to defend in front of a jury. The word jury landed the way Adrian had intended it to. Conrad's eyes moved, to the check in my hand, to my foreline, to the hallway where hospital staff were beginning to notice the gathering. 2 security officers appeared at the end of the hall. Behind them, a woman in a professional gray suit who I would later learn was the hospital's legal compliance director. Conrad looked at me one final time. The boardroom mask was gone, replaced by something I had never seen on his face before, the specific, panicked calculation of someone who realizes the plan has failed. Brecken, he said, and his voice had changed again, softer now, reaching for the version of himself I had once believed in. Let's talk about this reasonably. We are being reasonable, I said. This is what reasonable looks like when you run out of time. The compliance director reached us and asked Conrad to accompany her.
He went.
Georgiana's wheelchair was directed toward a separate consultation room. Sable stood alone for a moment, the diamond ring on her hand suddenly looking less like a victory and more like evidence, and then she walked quickly toward the elevator, without looking back. Adrian touched my arm. You should sit down. I know, I said. But I stayed standing a moment longer, watching the hallway empty of everything that had been built to destroy me, and I breathed through the pain in my side, and I let myself feel something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Not happiness. Not relief. Something older and quieter than both of those things. Like someone who had been stolen from and had finally gotten back to something true. The federal investigation was opened within 72 hours. The documents submitted to the hospital, the ones showing Georgiana Bennett as a compatible recipient, were confirmed as altered. The original compatibility report, the real one, showed that Georgiana was not a match for my kidney. She had never been a match. The entire submission had been constructed by a medical consultant the Bennett family had employed privately, a man who had his license revoked by the end of the month. Cassidy Roan went home 3 weeks after the surgery. Her mother sent a letter to the hospital that Dr. Whitmore passed along to me. It was 2 pages, handwritten, and I read it so many times the paper softened at the folds. Cassidy wanted to be a marine biologist. She had missed 2 years of school because of her illness. She was going back in the fall. The civil case moved quickly, largely because Conrad's legal team made the mistake of initially attempting to argue that the marriage had been entered in good faith, a position that collapsed almost immediately under the weight of documented communications between Conrad and Georgiana that Adrienne's discovery process uncovered. There were emails going back 4 years, from before Conrad and I had ever met, in which they discussed identifying a compatible donor through social means. There were records of Conrad researching me specifically, my blood type, my family status, my psychological profile based on public records and social media, before he ever approached me at that gala. He had been watching me for months before he walked up to those windows and asked if I was hiding too. The jury deliberations lasted less than a day. Conrad was ordered to pay damages that Adrian described as significant. More importantly, the criminal fraud charges resulted in consequences that no settlement could have sealed away, consequences that followed him far beyond the courtroom, into the professional and social world he had worked so carefully to build. Georgiana Bennett's medical situation required legitimate management. She found a match through the proper registry 14 months later.
I did not feel guilty about that.
I had made my peace with the kidney long before I understood what it had really saved. Sable Voss left Chicago. I don't know where she went, and I found, with some surprise, that I didn't care. I want to tell you where I am now because I think it matters. I left Chicago 8 months after the trial, not because I was running, but because I was ready. I moved to a coastal town in North Carolina that reminded me, in small, sideways ways, of the Ohio town I'd grown up in. I took a position consulting for a nonprofit focused on organ donor advocacy, working to strengthen the legal protections around living donors, to close the gaps that had allowed what happened to me to happen at all. I am not fixed.
I want to be honest about that.
I spent a long time learning how to trust the small things again. A morning, a kind word, a door held open by a stranger. There are still nights when I lie still and feel the absence where the kidney used to be and think about the person I was at that gala, laughing at a question from a man who had already studied me like a blueprint. But here is what I also know. Cassidy Roan is going to college next year. Marine biology. She sent me a photo from her first dive certification class, and she is laughing and she is alive and she doesn't know my name, and that is exactly as it should be. I gave something away that I cannot get back. But it went somewhere real. It went somewhere it was wanted. And the people who thought they could hollow me out and leave me behind in a storage room with a check and a cracked clock, they found out what I was actually made of. If someone could engineer an entire relationship just to get what they wanted from you, would you ever be able to see it coming? Or does real manipulation always wear the face of love?